All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Savannah. I'm with ATAP, and I have a very, very special guest here with us today. So I've got Jeremy Lyons in the room. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going quite well. How are you?
Doing all right.
Jeremy is here with us today to go over how first principles thinking can be applied to talent acquisition. And he does a way better job at explaining it than I do. And of course, I'm going to let him give himself a full introduction because, of course, I don't want to miss anything. So, Jeremy, take it away. We're happy you're here.
Happy to be here again. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Liz, for making this suggestion, and also Liz and Carrie for also uh, doing some promotion for the event as well. I did want to take just a quick minute in front of this all to also thank anybody who is doing anything for Los Angeles. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in Los Angeles. I've lived here pretty much my whole life outside of some time in Virginia and some time in Japan. And I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, to any work that you're doing, people that you're talking to, even just reaching out to individuals that you know who live here. It might not seem like a lot now, but it is going to show up sort of later on down the line, that support. So again, thank you, everybody, for the work that you've done. Um, so kind of jumping into it, I did the topic of this is first principles thinking. The underlying subtopic is starting at the beginning to go fast at the end, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to do kind of a very quick intro. I've been in the recruiting operations space now for 8+ years. This is going into year 9, but I am second generation recruiter. My mother was an executive recruiter. So I love to say to people, you know what? Hey, look, like I've been in this space since birth, and learned a lot in doing that. End of 2022, I co-founded a company called RecOps Collective with the goal of helping companies do recruiting operations better and making it more accessible to everybody. At the same time, too, I launched the most popular RecOps specific newsletter, the RecOps Roundup, which comes out every week unless I'm on vacation. um, but really a good resource for people in this space. And again, it focuses specifically on RecOps material, has updates from tools and vendors. I kind of take everything that's happened in a week and condense it into this newsletter. I also created a GPT in the OpenAI store called RecOps. It is the most popular RecOps GPT. And then one thing that I did want to also just kind of bring up because it showed up in advertising, I am neurodivergent, and also dyslexic. And so no matter how much I proofread some things, sometimes I will miss a word. And so I wanted to call that out. It was the beginning, not start beginning. So did want to, take that on myself. And then the other thing too is, and you're going to see this animal rolling throughout. I am a huge fan of quokkas. If you don't know what a quokka is, they are this small, kind of rodent-looking type creature, but they are all over the internet for smiling at people. They have no natural predators, and so they are very. When they interact with humans, they look very happy. They've got these big chubby cheeks. But getting into it today, so what our agenda is going to be is we're going to talk about what is first principles thinking. We're also going to talk about what is not first principles thinking. First principles thinking has been kind of thrown around a lot recently when it comes to ideas, when it comes to kind of thinking about problem solving. So there's a lot out there that might look like first principles thinking, might sound like first principles thinking, and we're going to cover over those because they can be used in tandem with first principles thinking, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are first principles thinking. And first principles thinking itself is actually very old. We're going to talk about a couple of ways that it can apply to talent acquisition. We're going to talk about how it can be used to enhance job descriptions and AI usage, also just how to use first principles thinking in those areas. We're going to talk about leveraging visual process maps. That's getting a lot of airtime right now, and how those can be used for first principles thinking. And then we're also going to be talking about ruthless prioritization. But before I do all of that, I did promise people that we're going to be talking about making sandwiches today, and it is lunchtime, so I thought, why not? And when I first thought about, okay, I'm going to talk about first principles thinking, I went back and thought about uh, one of those classes that you have in school where your teacher decides, you know what, hey, look, I'm going to play a game on the students and decides, I'm going to ask them, how do you make a sandwich? And the purpose of the exercise was to basically show how everything was interconnected. Because most people, when you say, how do you make a sandwich? You're going to say, well, I go and I get bread, and oh, I go and I get, mayo or lettuce or whatever you're going to put in your sandwich. And then I put it all together, and then I put it in my mouth and I eat it. And they would say, well, no, that's not how you make a sandwich. And you go, well, what do you mean? Well, where did you get the bread? Where did you get the ingredients? Well, I went to the store and I got them. Well, where did the store get them? And you go back to everything. And that is actually when I first started researching it, doing some research for this, just to confirm whether or not I was right that it was first principles thinking. That was root cause analysis, because if anything happens in the supply chain, there'd be a problem. But first principles thinking is looking at it and saying, okay, do we even need bread to make a sandwich? What is a sandwich? If you use a tortilla and you put the ingredients inside a tortilla and you make a burrito, is a burrito a sandwich? Depends on who you talk to. Those might be fighting words, depending on where you live. But I did say to people that we were going to be talking about how to make a sandwich, and this is why. So first introduction to people around first principles thinking. Before I even start, just by a quick show of hands, how many people know what I talk about when I say first principles thinking? And it's totally fine if you say nope.
I absolutely did not until our prep session, so I'm just going to be super honest. You're teaching us, Jeremy.
Awesome. Well, I love that. I just saw the Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix. Great little watch. One of the quotes that kind of came out of that is, I'm a teacher first. And for those who have not followed or know about my career, I actually started out as a teacher in Japan. And teaching has always been very, very key and fundamental. And it is actually more or less a core principle around recruiting operations. To be a teacher, you have to understand how to not only take the technology, you have to understand how to teach the technology as well to people. So that's good, because what I want to do is I'm going to tell you what first principles thinking is. So what is first principles thinking? You might see me say FTP, first principles thinking, just try to say that 10 times fast or whatever. I might get tongue tied, but I'll try to make it not as crazy. But essentially, first principles thinking is a problem solving approach that breaks down complex problems to their most basic, undeniable truths and builds solutions from the ground up, free of assumptions, analogies, or established practices. Now, there's key words in that, which are free of assumptions, analogies, and established practices. The purpose of using first principles thinking is to go and look at what are the smallest base components of this, and how are we going to build something new, build something different, or think about something different. It's not just purely about building, it's about breaking down things. So a couple of other kind of key things, what is the benefit? Encourages innovation and eliminates assumptions. What are key features about this definition? Again, breaking down complexity. It's focusing on identifying the foundational elements. It's challenging assumptions, which is not necessarily taking questions for granted or taking assumptions for granted. It's rebuilding from the ground up. And then the other thing too that I like, and I got kind of a little bit ahead of myself here, but one thing that I would love to point out is this is not a new concept. This is actually Aristotle, and even pre-Aristotle. So Aristotelian logic, if you are familiar with it, comes down to first principles thinking and identifying truths. So I told people I would say this. What is not first principles thinking? And for these examples, one thing that I'm going to tell you is what is their definition and why it is different from first principles thinking, because I think that that's important as well. So the first one we're going to talk about here is analogical thinking. So that's using an analogy. So it's solving problems by drawing comparisons to existing solutions or scenarios. And why it's different from first principles thinking is that first principles thinking avoids relying on past solutions or analogies. It focuses on breaking the problem into its fundamental components, not copying or tweaking existing models. It's first principles thinking is not about taking that Excel formula from one sheet to another sheet because it's sort of solved the same sort of problem and now you're rejiggering that formula. Best practices. So best practices are following an established method or an industry standard. We use them all the time. We talk to other people in our space all the time. But while they are useful, best practices are built on historical success and assumptions. First principles thinking is about challenging those assumptions, underlying these practices, and building new solutions from scratch. Incremental improvements. A lot of talk about this. It's that, like, how do we make something 1% better? And doing that every day, because iteratively, when you make those existing changes, you are going to get incrementally better. Jim Miller talks about this a lot, and it does a great job of breaking it down, helping people understand it. And so, but where first principles thinking comes into conflict with that is that incremental improvement works within an existing framework, while first principles thinking is about reimagining the framework itself, questioning whether or not the current structure is necessary or optimal. And that becomes very key when talking about things. Next, brainstorming. I think, you go through a broad range of ideas without constraints. Brainstorming can be unfocused or unconstrained, while first the principles thinking is structured and disciplined, focusing on breaking down and rebuilding based on fundamental truths. So that becomes kind of key. Systems thinking, understanding and optimizing the interconnected components of a system. We've been talking about a lot. We use that a lot in recruiting operations and thinking about our systems. What do we have available? How do we do that? We do that a lot in design thinking as well. But systems thinking focuses on the relationships and the interactions within a system, whereas first principles thinking is zooming in on the system's foundational building blocks, challenging their validity before addressing those relationships. The most common one that you're probably going to see when you're hearing it, and you heard me mention it before, is that root cause analysis. People sometimes think that first principles thinking and root cause analysis are the same thing. They are not. Root cause analysis is identifying and addressing the underlying causes of a problem and can be used in partnership with first principles thinking. But root cause analysis seeks the source of an issue within an existing framework. First principles thinking goes further, questioning whether the framework itself is built on sound assumptions. Creative problem solving. I think we've all seen this, but it may rely on intuition. It may rely on analogies, existing paradigms. First principles thinking is more grounded in those foundational truths. Common sense might seem kind of funny because common sense is not that common. But common sense would be based really around the societal norms and heuristics, which may be based on flawed assumptions. So first principles are about questioning, are there very obvious, or are there even obvious truths? Last two to think about, reductionism. So that's breaking down complex systems into smaller components to understand them, kind of very similar to root cause analysis. But while similar to first principles thinking, doesn't just break things down, it seeks the irreducible truths or elements and rebuilds from those, often challenging whether existing parts are necessary. And then last but not least, lean thinking. And lean is a methodology about eliminating waste and maximizing value. It operates within a process of making things more efficient. And again, first principles thinking questions whether the process itself is the right one or even necessary. So I'll leave this up here for a second, just so that everybody has some time, because I know I just threw a lot at people. But as you can see, there are a lot of things probably up here that you might have associated with first principles thinking. And I don't want to tell people that you're wrong and that's bad or anything like that. chances are when you've heard this and you've heard all of these things being talked about, you've been hearing them being talked about together because they can be used together. And I think that that's an important thing to distinguish. And I think that it's an important thing to distinguish, especially if you're using any sort of LLM or any sort of AI to help you generate an answer when you're talking to your business units, where you want to sound and you want to use the language of the business. It will help you to come back and say to them, you know what, like, here's where I went with first principles thinking, and then here's where I went with this other method and this other methodology, and that will in turn sort of help endear a little bit of talking to the business. So why should we be using first principles thinking in talent acquisition? And this image, I showed it to my wife last night. She was like, well, can you get the hole to look a little bit bigger? But I was trying to go square peg round hole. And ChatGPT did not want to cooperate with me, but I thought I still wanted to use this image, namely because I liked it. um, but why should we be thinking about using first principles in talent acquisition? And I think the biggest thing right now is that we're at this inflection point in TA where there is a lot of complexity and change that is going on in our landscape, not only with the tools, but with the process, with how we're thinking about we're going to be recruiting in the future, especially with how are people going to be using generative AI as a co-pilot? How are people going to be doing different things? And so first principles thinking can make sure that we're going back and we're focusing where we need to be focused, where we can become very strategic partners to the business. Also, first principles thinking is about eliminating inefficiencies and redundant process. I believe that a lot of people are talking about this right now if they're not already doing it. And the focus here becomes, well, how are we doing more with less? You're hearing that a lot. And first principles thinking can help people think, okay, if we have to do more with less and the technology isn't sort of there, or our teams are getting to a certain point, this is how we can really go back and think about the work that we do and really make it more strategic work. And then also it's about fostering innovation for better hiring outcomes. And I think that that is an important thing to note and to touch on as well. So getting into it, my very first one here is about job descriptions. And depending on who you talk to, job descriptions can take on a number of different flavors. And there's actually more than one way to write a job description, though many of us have probably followed one standard. I do recommend checking out folks like Lou Adler around performance-based writing of job descriptions. I do also recommend talking to or following Katrina Kibben. They're great for their work around job descriptions as well. And part of the reason why I say that is that a lot of people are talking about quality of hire, and quality of hire can even start simply at what you've written in the job description and how you are going to use that to measure pieces. So getting into this, so one of the ways that you can use first principles thinking is around what truly matters in the job description. And that can differ from company to company to company. And that's why going back to first principles thinking within that company and understanding it, or within your current company and understanding it, can be really, really, really important, because you need to be able to tell people how to read the job description, what is most important in that. And one of the ways that you can do that and make it easier on people is strip away jargon and unnecessary requirements. So here's what I mean by stripping away jargon. We've all seen this on job descriptions where people are writing excellent communicator, excellent writer, excellent anything. We've also seen people who will say proven experience in. And for a good portion of last year, I was helping a company write their job descriptions and building out a job description program. And these were things that I eliminated. Why did I eliminate them? Because if you go back to the first principles, thinking of that, who's defining excellence? Who's talking? Who proves the experience? Is the proof of the experience in Time spent is the proof of experience and impact. What it is it ambiguous? And then also ability to work in an ambiguous environment. At one point in time, this actually was something. It just did mean something. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself when somebody has written this is, or you're working with your teams when they're talking about ability to work in an ambiguous environment, what makes the environment ambiguous? Is it that you don't know the direction you're going? So you need people who can do work, busy work maybe, or is it that you know the direction that you're going, you know the North Star, the constellation that you're trying to hit, but you're not really sure how to get there yet? Or is it the stakeholders that are making this ambiguous? And if it's the stakeholders that are changing their minds, maybe can't level down on things or level up on things or things like that, that's stakeholder management. That is a different skill. But ambiguous and writing an ambiguous job description does not help anybody. Unnecessary requirements. If you have a job description where you are listing more things that are nice to haves than full on requirements, you probably already have a problem with your job description. And it doesn't mean that those nice to haves can't be talked about. It's not a matter that you have to eliminate them really altogether, but if you strip away stuff, you will to really get to the core part of what a job description is. That's something to be thinking about. And the core part of a job description is that there is a problem that can only be solved or addressed by adding another individual to the team. That is, at its functioning truth, why a job description does exist in many ways. So how do you use first principles thinking to go back and think about job descriptions and work like that? Think about the role essentials, think about the measurables, think about the correctly identifiable skills, and those pieces will all come together when you go back and you use first principles thinking. Okay, AI. And also, by the way, thank you for everybody who are dropping comments in the chat. That's good. Also leave questions in the chat. There will be time for Q&A at the end, or I will do my best to talk to some of the questions as well. All right, so talking about AI, because it's impossible not to talk about AI. So when using first principles thinking, when it comes to AI and TA, you have to understand AI's role in it. And that's, what are its benefits? What are its limitations? Here is what I tell when I've been talking with people about AI use in TA that I oftentimes talk about, which is, what is your AI strategy and why is that your AI strategy? If your AI strategy is that you would like your company to use AI as a co-pilot, you will build your strat. You will think about this first. You will use first principles thinking very differently than you would if your idea and AI strategy is to replace. And that is an uncomfortable thing to talk about with people, because talking about replacing people, you were talking about people. People have feelings and things like that. And so I think that is an important thing when you're going back to first principles thinking in terms of using AI and TA, is thinking about that. And so questions you might ask is, what are we solving with AI? And how does AI enhance our decision making? What can we use? Why can we use it? And going back to the fundamental truths of the question. And then you want to think about ensuring ethical and bias-free AI usage. I know BrightHire just came out and said, we went through an audit. We are a unbiased AI. There are a number of tools out there that can help with ethical AI use, compliance around it. I know Warden AI out of the UK is an up and comer. Definitely something to look at. Okay, gonna stop here just to take a quick drink of water. And now I want to talk about visual process maps. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about visual process maps is that humans are visual creatures, and having laid out everything before us can make things very much easier to work with and stay organized. And that is where visual process maps can come in handy. It's very, I'm sure that right now I've probably thrown a lot of information at you all. And because I've thrown that information at you all, one of the things that can be hard is remembering all of it, sequencing all of it, putting it all together, and then going, okay, this is how this thing places here, and this is how this thing places there. And that's why visual process maps, which are graphical representations that illustrate the workflow steps and activities involved in a process or a workflow, can really be helpful. They can serve as planning, they can they can serve as management tools that help organize, understand, analyze, and improve process. They are very, 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 very important. If you are ever confused about your process or you're ever confused about your steps, something that I will always recommend doing is sit down. You can take a piece of paper. You can just start drawing all the things that have to go into something, and you will start to see either there are a lot of clicks, there's a lot of process for process sake, and you might be doing processes because that's how we've always done it. And that might not necessarily be best. So we've kind of already covered what are visual process maps. But couple of examples to throw out there: swim lanes, flow charts, things like that. That's usually what people think of when they think of process maps, and that's accurate. Those are a couple of ways to do it. But you can also use them in your personal life too as well, especially when you want to know who's responsible for what in your household. And one of the things that they have a benefit for doing is, clarity, alignment, process optimization. It can really help when you go back and you're using first principles thinking to really understand the lay of the land and how things are moving. And there are a number of tools out there for creating impactful visuals. You've got your lucid charts, you've got your Miros. I'm sure that there are tons of other ones out there. You can even use Google Slides, you can use Excel, you can really use a lot of things. And we're going to kind of cover how a visual process map can help. And so, kind of jumping into it, all the little elements on your visual process map are going to be called components. They represent the basic elements as individual nodes. For those who are not known for who do not know networking terms, a node is usually the endpoint or a point along the process or along a trail. Sometimes a good visual for this is you think about the tree, a tree. You think about the branches that stick out from the tree. Nodes would be kind of considered like the leaves. When you apply first principles thinking to each step in your process map, it will help you identify and eliminate unnecessary assumptions or outdated practices that may be hindering efficiencies. This is why putting together a process map helps, because if you put down every piece, you'll be able to identify things. We will also talk about how you can avoid your process map turning into a root cause analysis, but that will come in a second. Innovative, you will also talk about innovative recombination. So after breaking down the process, you can use your visual process map to explore new ways of combining fundamental elements, and this can lead to innovative solutions or process improvements. Clarity and communication, visual process maps provide a clear, easy to understand representation of your first principles approach, making it easier to communicate complex ideas to team members or stakeholders. Sometimes working with hiring managers, it can be really easy for certain steps to get convoluted, but a process map, certainly you can send them an update and sort of say, hey, we are here in this segment. This is what I'm expecting from you. This is what you're expecting from me. This is great. Gap identification. So by visually mapping out the first principles of a process, you can easily identify gaps or missing elements that need to be addressed. Optimization focus. You can use first principles to identify core functions of each step in your process map, and this will allow you to optimize for function rather than form, potentially leading to more efficient or innovative solutions. And then iterative improvements. So by combining first principles thinking with improvement methodologies, or within continuous improvement methodologies. And this is where I went back and I said, you can use the methods that I mentioned earlier together. You can use your visual map to track changes and improvements over time as you apply first principles thinking to refining processes. Now, I mentioned that root cause analysis piece. It's very easy on a visual process map to put everything down, and as you're putting things down, go, wait, this is a problem. Let's go solve this here. Let's go solve this there. That's this is that. And I think that one of the things that's really, really important when you're using first principles thinking, when you're doing a visual process map, is you want to hold off on trying to solve before you've gone back to the very, very, very beginning, because what might be what might look like the problem might actually be a symptom of something that is happening earlier. So stick to process steps. So concentrate on the documentation of the sequence of activities in the current process, avoiding the temptation to analyze. Use standard symbols. There are symbols when you do a process map. We've all seen them. There's triangles, there's diamonds, there's boxes, there's rhombuses. There's all those geographical shapes that we all learned when we were in school and now have forgotten. But they all have specific meanings, and you want to make sure that when you're using them, that there is a standardization of those symbols and flows so that everybody understands what they mean and don't have to sort of treat it like a George R.R. Martin book where you have the characters and you have your own chart about what they've been doing sitting right next to you, or like Shakespeare where you're reading with the translation on one side and the story on the other to make sure that you understand, because we all know Old English perfectly, right? So other things to do, the process map will help you maintain chronological order, ensuring that the map follows the actual sequence of events rather than branching out to explore other causes of issues. The other thing too is you want to limit your detail level. So you want to keep your map to the appropriate level of detail to show the overall process flow without diving too deep into specific problem areas. You can save that for another session. You also want to use neutral and descriptive language for each step rather than phrases that imply cause and effect. So that becomes important. You want to separate improvement ideas. And this is what I was talking about earlier. You don't necessarily want to stop people from talking about, hey, this is an idea that I have for this. You want to kind of gather it, put it in a parking lot and have it, and go from there. You want to focus on what's, not whys. I'm a huge why person. Why is my question word? I will always ask people, what's your question word? I encourage people to think about what their question word is. It matters a lot to the work that we do, probably a lot more than you think, because if you are a why person and you're going into an environment that is a what culture, you will run into problems because you will be there asking why and everybody will be doing what. Just something to think about for later. And then again, the use of swim lanes, if applicable, will help show what different departments and roles involved, which will maintain the focus on the process rather than the problem analysis aspect of your visual process map. All right, last big core idea here before I tie everything together. Ruthless prioritization plays a crucial role in first principles thinking by helping us focus on the most fundamental and impactful elements of a problem or process. Here's how they work together. So when you are working and using first principles thinking with ruthless prioritization, why are we prioritizing? Because time and resource constraints are there. It's why it's important to identify core principles. When you are ruthlessly prioritizing, you're only looking at the most essential parts and eliminating less crucial factors. And this allows for a clear focus on the foundational truths that are relevant to the problem at hand. Resource allocation: by prioritizing ruthlessly, you're able to allocate limited resources. And I say limited resources, I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about time, I'm talking about effort, to explore and apply it to the most critical first principles that you need to be fixing, and that ensures that you remain efficient and targeted. We'll also take a little side detour to say here, economics as a field of study is not just a field of study around dollars and cents. Um, Economics is really a study of how does a society allocate its scarce resources. Time is a scarce resource. Emotion is a scarce resource. Energy is a scarce resource. You do not have infinite amount of that. And that is important when you're thinking about how do you prioritize, ruthlessly prioritize something, because you want to make sure that you are cutting up those energy blocks and those time blocks into things that can be done, and that you are not using that on things that aren't really going to make an impact. So for example, you want to think about kind of impact versus effort matrices. You want to focus on the why behind the things that you are doing. And by streamlining your analysis, you're going to help cut through complexities by focusing on the most important aspects. You will help your decision making. Other matrices that you can use, the Eisenhower matrix is a great one. The Rumsfeld matrix is also a great one. These are all things that can be used. And then also it will help you accelerate innovation, again, because you will have clarified goals. So tying all of this together, and I talked about at the beginning, this is the work that you do at the beginning of the process so that you can go fast at the end. I like to tell people this because it can attach certain meaning. NFL playoffs are going on right now. I played football for a long time despite my diminutive frame. But the thing that I like to tell people is it's very hard to think in a football helmet. A lot of practice and that repetition is so that when you are in the game, you're not thinking about what's the play. You're just in action mode. It's just do, and you're reacting to what you see in front of you. That's the importance of using first principles thinking and doing the upfront work. Because if you do the upfront work, when you get to the end, when you need to close a candidate, when you need to launch a project, when you need to do those things, you're not also then in this moment of like thinking too much about what needs to happen. It's just go and do. So tying it all together, first principles thinking by breaking down your complex your issues into their fundamental components, your first principles thinking will allow for more targeted and effective solutioning, potentially saving you time in the long term. Will also help you with innovative solutions. So first principles thinking will enable you to create novel approaches that can lead to breakthrough innovations, potentially even leapfrogging incremental improvements that you can make. It will increase your adaptability. So once you've kind of mastered your first principles thinking and mastered doing this work up front, it becomes a habit, becomes kind of how you're thinking about things. And that allows for quicker analysis, more creative problem solving across a number of different things, not only professionally, but also personally. It will avoid a lot of wasted effort. How many times have we all gotten to the end of a process and then people say, oh, well, now I want to do this, or I want to do that, or all these things? Because you've identified everything up front and you've talked about everything up front, those changes are not going to you're not going to run down a pathway, hit a dead end, and now have to turn around, backtrack, and go back. Last but not least, clarity and focus, kind of akin to that. It'll help you identify core issues, allowing teams to prioritize the effort on the most impactful areas, leading to faster overall progress. And I know doing work up front sounds scary to a lot of people, but strategically speaking, when you are doing the work up front, you will get faster at the back. And then I had to do it. I had to give a speedy little coca here for that. I was told I needed to have a spicy take. For those of you who just have just met me, I used to do a spicy take every Thursday when I had something spicy to comment on. The last time Liz asked me this, just out of the blue, I came back with a spicy take that was more mayo than anything on the Scoville chart, and so I had to come up with something for this one. Um, and the spicy take that I have here is that, and I'll give it from the RecOps lens, is that a lot of RecOps teams assume that our recruiting teams and our recruiters are just as curious about things as we are. It's not true. Recruiters are curious about very different things most of the time than the RecOps side, and that has to be reconciled more than that. And those teams need to come together. But that is my spicy take for you, Liz. Um, so now I want to jump into the Q&A. I'll come back to this slide, but I did want to give people an opportunity to just, here are my QR codes for my LinkedIn, my Substack, which is my newsletter, and the GPT. And I will leave this up for a second while I catch up on just the notes, and then I will go back to the Q&A.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. I imagine you probably need just a little bit of a breather anyways. You really did a great job tying all of this together and sharing this content with us. So I just want to take a moment to appreciate that and, to say thank you. I truly believe that when you have a certain knowledge that it's great to share it, and that's kind of what ATAP is really all about, is all of us kind of growing together, learning together, all trying to get better at what we do and what we love together. So thank you for being a key part of that and our first speaker for 2025. And I have already nabbed this RecOps GPT. I'm all about playing with that. I'm excited. I love new tools. I'm a weirdo that way. But as we go through and start on some Q&A, you've got a few here. Do you want me to read you some questions? Does anyone feel like raising their hand? Do you prefer to just go through the chat yourself and read them at your leisure? What's your preference, Jeremy?
Why don't you bring it down for me there, so that I can you have a better handle on them. I want to make sure I don't miss any of them.
You are totally fine. I got you. All right. So as I'm scrolling through the chat here, one of the comments, this isn't a question, that I notice is reviewing the what is not first principles thinking is really helping to snap into what it is. And I mean, I absolutely agree. That one came from Liz. That was, I think, a really key part of this, because it did kind of come across at first as being a little bit confusing with other sort of, project management ideas, and I say other project management because once again, I was just kind of struck by how we really are managing projects as we're as we're doing talent acquisition. And there's a lot of different principles that can apply to both worlds, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that, is certainly a conversation that's happening in the recruiting operations space, certainly a conversation that is happening in other areas as well, especially on the ops side, and where people can borrow principles from, is that recruiting operations has to kind of think of things like products, and or TAs, product managers and project managers usually. Um, but one of the ideas that I've been throwing around for people to, especially when it comes to a job search, is that what we should start to treat job search or a job like is that you're launching a company. Um, you are essentially, when you open a job, you are launching an investment from the company into an individual that is going to help the company grow financially, grow from a product standpoint, grow from a cultural standpoint as well. And one of the reason why I've sort of took that thinking, and where first principles can also help, is that my dad was a unit production manager and line producer in television. And for those of you who don't know what that role is, it is essentially the COO of a television set. And when you set up a show, it's not called a show, you're setting up a company. You literally are doing that. And so for 40 plus years of my dad's career, companies came to him, or studios came to him and said, here is a bucket of money, here is a script, And in 8 to 12 weeks, we need a finished product that we can show as a pilot. And we need to be able to do, and then from there, if it gets picked up, you're going to need to be essentially setting up every episode, budgeting, all of those things. That means that from where his position, he has to hire everybody. He has to find the space where they're going to shoot. He has to know local regulations. He has to know all of these things. And one of the things that if you go back in your intake meetings and you phrase back to the hiring manager or the business lead that like you're not just, this isn't just a person that we're investing in. We're investing in starting a company with this role. It changes the meaning of what that intake meeting can look like. It can take things back to first principles because no one wants to launch a failed company. People are sort of a little bit different when they're sort of like, oh, well, if this person doesn't work out, then, whatever, we'll hire somebody new. But that's sort of the mindset that I've been talking about with people taking on certain things, is that you don't want to necessarily, if you're not taking the launching the role seriously and you're not taking that position that hiring is a privilege, um, and you're dealing with actual people, the reframe, the going back to first principles on the role can be really, 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 really helpful.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. I have another question for you from the chat. This one is coming from Carrie, and she is challenging you in a good way
Okay.
to tell us, can you help us find the balance? Like, at what point does it become too granular if you're breaking something down into first principle thinking? Because if it becomes too granular, it could eventually become impractical, right? So, how do you find that balance?
I think that that's a great question. And I think that that balance is, you don't necessarily have to do this every single time. Like, let's just talk about a role for a second here. If you're hiring a BDR or a role that you're going to be hiring over and over and over and over again, going back to first principles every single time is going to be not the best exercise. Now, if it's something where maybe you hire this once and then in the next year you're hiring it again and it's like a once every year kind of thing. Once you do the activity or you focus on those first principles the first time, you're front loading all this work, you can go back and iterate on that because maybe the fundamental truths aren't changing, but the iteration part of it needs to change. So I'm not advocating for every single time going back to first principles, but certainly, because that would be way too much work and way too granular, but certainly if it's something that is totally brand new, going to first principles would be a great thing to do. If it's something that's always been done and you're not necessarily seeing the positives, the ROIs from that, using first principles can be a good activity there. The point is not to, again, with first principles thinking, it's not to add, it's not to just like keep doing stuff for the sake of keeping doing it. It's not ritual. But you want to go back and use it where it can really make an impact. But Carrie, by all means, challenge me more if that's a little too broad of an answer.
No,
Thank
that
you.
helps. Thank you.
No, I think you did good. I'm sorry, Carrie. I didn't mean to interrupt you. What were you saying?
No, so that helps. That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
It does. And I saw another question, and I think that's more concept related to how our events work in the chat. Daniela, you asked, since you're new to the concept, is it an individual exercise or group? So basically, you can either come off of mute and ask away, or you can put questions in the chat. We're pretty informal here. We want this to sort of feel, uh, I hate the term fireside chat. I really do, but that's the common way that we would describe the structure, right? So just ask
It's the
away if
best
you
thing to
have
do with somebody
anything.
from LA. Right.
Right, I know. That's terrible. I'm just
Coffee
glad
chat.
you're safe, Jeremy. But let's see here as we go through. Oh, I see
But to
another.
address it, it can be individual, it can be in a group. The thing that I say to that is just depends on your surroundings. I think when people think of first principles thinking, and at least how I've been talking about it here, it seems much more professional. But I would argue and say that like I've done this exercise in my own life. I've done this with how I'm approaching my job search, how I think about work I'm doing with the clients that I have through RecOps Collective, anything like that. You can go back and do it yourself. If you're in a company, certainly you can do it with other people. You can do it with business leads, things like that. It's about setting aside the time to do it and not sort of, it's not driving towards an outcome immediately, but it is that continuous work that can be done.
Oh, see, now I'm gonna show my neurodivergence. I thought your question was asking about the structure of how we're organizing our chat here. So my apologies, that one's on me. But it's kind of funny, so I'm just gonna roll with it. Sometimes we just have to be able to laugh, right? Thank you, Jeremy, for picking up on it though and actually answering the question. I'm pretty sure you picked up on the correct meaning. Is that right, Daniela?
Yes, yeah, I was looking more for how you do um, the thinking. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, but
Yeah.
it goes to show actually, like this is why first principles thinking is really, really important in getting clarity on process. You know, Savannah, you read it one way, I read it in another. And if we're working on something together and we don't have that shared understanding of what the question actually was, we're going to start doing work in two different ways, which is going to be all wasted effort, as opposed to working on like, all right, what is the fundamental truth of this question? Where is this going? Do we have the understanding and how do we build to answer from that?
Yes, that's actually really good. I'm glad I was able to give us a live example. One of us was doing a why and one was doing a what, right?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so hey, clarity helped. We
Yeah.
got to apply it live in person. All right, we have one more question here. I'm seeing this is another one from Carrie. Thank you. For those of us new to first principles thinking, what's the best way to practice or develop the skill over time?
So there is an activity that you can use, and it is called the 5 whys technique. Thank you so much again for attending, Jennifer. So the 5 whys technique was started out of Toyota, and it's essentially like the purpose is to repeatedly ask the question of why. And so the aspect of this, and I actually have it up. So great prompting question. I was looking into it because I thought somebody might ask that very question too. And so the purpose is to drill down into the details of a problem and uncover its fundamental cause rather than just addressing surface level symptoms. So we had talked about that kind of through. The process is you start with a clearly defined problem statement, then ask why successively, with each answer forming the basis for the next question. On while 5 is a guideline, the numbers are going to do that. And Liz, you're right. It does sound like root cause analysis, but what can start as root cause analysis can also go further and beyond that. So it's sort of to say all, I don't want to misphrase it. It's like the all root causes and analysis could be first principles thinking, but not all first principles thinking can be root cause analysis. It's like not all ironies are coincidences or whatever that one is. But the application for this is that like it becomes the goal. So if the goal is to find the problem, then it's a root cause analysis. If the goal is to get to the fundamental truths, then it's first principle thinking. And so you can build on that. You can use that in your own life. You can use that in your own techniques. I certainly have used that technique in first principles thinking when it comes to, again, job searching, questions that I'm going to ask in my interviews about a company, to determine what works for me based on my experiences and why those are my experiences. Because I've lived through some really crazy times. And we'll say, there have been times in my career where, I picked something because it looked shiny and it looked pretty and I really wanted it. but it wasn't the best decision for me. And so I have to ask myself, how do I avoid getting myself into those situations again? So you can pick anything and just work back and back and back using 5 whys. You could really do anything. I'm sure from this call you can take go to Google, go to Perplexity, go through anything and just say like, what are techniques that I can use to use first principles thinking. So go from there.
I think that was a really excellent way to wrap us up, Jeremy. It kind of just ties everything all in together. We are running out of time. If anybody has any more quick questions, you can kind of throw it out there and we'll do our best. But if not, we can all go ahead and get to our sandwiches and our quokkas. Um, and Jeremy, if you did have to make a sandwich to impress a quokka, what kind would it be?
Ooh, great question. But the other thing, before I answer that, the other thing I'll say is by all means, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I still answer my message. Please connect with me. I love talking with people about everything and anything. So I like to make myself as accessible as possible. So by all means, don't be a stranger. Just remind me how we got connected and all that. Sandwich that I would make for a coca. Admittedly, I might do something like a cucumber sandwich. I think for me personally, if I was making a sandwich for myself, I'm probably doing like a grilled cheese with like a smoked Gruyere on some like good sourdough bread.
Ooh, okay, I
Pretty
like your
pretty simple.
sandwich better. Even though I love cucumbers, you can't beat a good grilled cheese.
No, you really can't.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you all so much for spending our lunch break together. Another big shout out and thank you to Jeremy. Thank you for coming to share with us and spending your time to help us learn something new. I mean, this was actually a brand new concept to me, and now I have homework, as Liz said, and that's a good thing.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you all again.
Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.